Angry Jamie. Anarcho-Communism versus MMT welfare capitalism. Why are you in favor of the former before the latter? Explain. By the way, great show today.
Why, thank you. I mean, I have a much longer answer to this question, and I think
we got to do a special day where you get a chance to do this.
I can do a whole segment on it. I might do a whole show about it. I might bring in some heavy hitters to talk about it on my own podcast when that launches.
Whenever I hear that, then that song comes up again in my head when she says that. But she says, like, I may bring in some heavy hitters.
Like, I got some people on deck. But in a short version, do you want me to answer it now, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, okay. As I understand it, MMT only works it would work for the U.S. because we hold the world's reserve currency, and we can print our own money. It would not work as well in other places where they can't do that. Also, it doesn't change the basic relations between labor and capital. It doesn't change the relations of exploitation. And
well, now wait a second. That part, I mean, I think your first point is true to a certain extent. It's definitely not as universal. But theoretically, if MMT welfare capitalism, I'm guessing at what this guy is saying, is that we have the money to provide everyone with health care in this country. We have the money to provide everyone with free daycare. We have the money to provide, maybe a universal basic income. Theoretically, every time you relieve a worker of costs, right, of expenses, you are changing the dynamic between them and capital.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about a non-reformist reform, I think, because once those dynamics change, what's to stop the workers from trying to move it all the way in their favor and getting rid of bosses altogether? I mean, it goes to a more basic question, I think, which is something you and I talk about a lot, Sam, which is social democracy a sufficient solution to the problems created by capitalism? And I think it's certainly better than what we have now. And I believe in it as a stop on the way. But we've seen, just for example, we had the New Deal came at a time of resurgent power for workers and for the working class. And it was a compromise between labor and capital. And it was supposed to hold for, it was supposed to continue indefinitely. And what we saw was, as soon as that happened, capital was plotting their return throughout the entire 20th century until finally they were able to when economic conditions shifted. So if you have the chance, if workers have enough power to force these sweeping social democratic reforms, I think they should. It's like leaving a very dangerous enemy alive rather than killing them so that they never bother you again. And what we're seeing now, this shift towards neoliberalism and this resurgence in the power of capital, is it's always going to happen, and it's always going to be looming. So if we are at the point where we have the power to force that, then why not take it all the way? Okay.
Then I think that's the most definitive answer to that question, which is the problem with MMT welfare capitalism is that it may be a short-term fix, but you are still the desire for capital to throw that off, those short-term fixes off, or to mutate those short-term fixes in a way that is consistent with capitalism is problematic, because you're always going to have to fight that fight instead of progressing into who knows what, the development of us as just floating orbs. I
fully automated gay luxury space communism.
But and I think that this is probably, I think I need to think through this more, but I have it has occurred to me, why where my reluctant. I don't know if reluctance is the right word, but part of the reason why I think I am satisfied with social democracy and where that rests, I don't know. On the great scheme of things, but part of that is I think just because I figure I'm too old to have to actually really deal with it when it comes back like that. If we get to that point where we're at social democracy and the workers are in a position to stomp out capitalism, I figure like I'm out of the game anyways at that point. Even if I'm still breathing, I'm wheezing somewhere and just hoping someone's going to wheel me around. But I also think, and I haven't fleshed this out more, that and maybe this is just by nature of having been raised by an attorney, I think there is something to attention in society that between that having, I don't know that competition is the right word for it, and it isn't actually, but by having some tension is healthy. And I'm not necessarily convinced that you can't make structural changes that can inhibit and limit the ability of capital from having the type of nefarious resurgence that it has had. I mean, look, if you take away like even just like Taft-Hartley, right? We're living in a very different world, I think, right now. And the thing is that there's no guarantee that I don't know that there is such a thing as wiping out anything, any ideology. I don't know if you can get to that place. Now, maybe it's a longer term fix if you do. But I don't know that I buy that there is that type of permanence is possible. And so that
permanence for what?
Well, the idea that I think just, we're talking very sort of hypothetically and conceptually, but the idea that you could get to a state where the will to accumulate relative to those around you is gone. Right? I mean, that's what we're talking about in terms of elimination of capitalism. I think that, and that's my concern, is that ultimately that concentration of either wealth or maybe it comes out in terms of power is part of the human condition, and that it may not be shared by everybody, but those who have it intensely have a certain advantage because they're willing to do things that other people aren't and don't have the same set of values, and that on some level that is, this is a little bit more philosophical. And like I say, I generally don't spend too much time thinking about these things because I feel like, I'll probably be decomposing by the time that any of this stuff gets even remotely close to. But and as long as we're heading down a certain trajectory, I'm pretty happy. But that's my sense.
Well, it's hard to say what human nature really is. I mean, I don't go in for a lot of evolutionary psychology, but I also know that it's very difficult to prove a negative. But I think what matters more than human psychology and what's natural or unnatural is that we are an amazingly complex species, humans, and we have the ability to create the world that we want for ourselves. And if you look at the past, a lot of what we think of as human nature is heavily mediated by the material conditions. Like Michael had was it Christopher Ryan, the author of Sex at Dawn, on his show to talk about, sort of debunk some myths about early humans, and even some that I believed myself. And one of them was there weren't a lot of wars. There was nothing to fight over really because you couldn't preserve food for that long. and people moved around. So it wasn't really possible to hoard stuff. And it behooved them, in order to survive, to share with their neighbors when one tribe caught a buffalo or whatever. And that motivated them to be very communal in their living situations. And I think that we could do that again if we realize that that is the best way for everyone to survive. Not because it's the right thing to do necessarily, although I think it is, but because it's also the practical thing to do. And you're never gonna keep people from having bad qualities. You know, I think certain kinds of hierarchical thinking are always going to happen, but we can set society up such that it creates a material motivation to behave in a more communal way.
Yeah, I think we can set it up in a more communal way. But I'm just saying, if the idea is to get rid of capitalism because it is its tendency to try and take over and dominate and exploit, I guess I'm suggesting that that impetus that drives it and is manifested through capitalism is always going to exist. So from my perspective, I would like to develop a system that assumes the presence of that force and is structured in such a way in which the tensions are to keep it in check. But I mean, again, this couldn't get less tangible. To be continued. Did you read the Capital book I gave you? I'm reading it. Yes, as we go along. I have a lot of books that I'm reading right now that are taking my attention. But
excellent.
I think you can acknowledge the usefulness of MMT without saying now you trust capitalism and capitalists. Like, I mean, from my perspective, I want the MMT driven New Deal 2.0 that's not like racist and patriarchal. I think like we have to try that first. Have to try going for one of those because that's like concrete.
The good news is that I think we would all agree that it's heading in the right direction, and it very well is could empower. Certainly. The less it could empower those forces that would go to where maybe Jamie would want and where I want. So they're all consistent, and we're on the same bus route. And at one point we can decide where we want to get off as we get a notion of what's going down the route, as it were.
I feel like if we create a pragmatic plan for fully automated gay space luxury communism that seems like it's all the numbers check out, I feel like Sam would be down. No,
it's very possible. But like I say,
Brunig's think tank on it.
He just wants to see some details.
I want to see some details, but I also think that, I mean, to be honest, I'm going to be at that point, I'm just going to be hoping to be able to play video games.
Well, Ganesh Sitaraman, that Crisis of the Middle Class Constitution, that whole book is about how America's Constitution was written assuming general levels of equality. And it didn't really work like that. Whereas European constitutions, they have like the House of Lords, where you have the upper crust, you have the House of Commons. Like they sort of, the economics of the country are sort of figured into the
economics or the social status.
Right. Yeah.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos